If you like the sweet science, get ready to talk boxing on the Gloved Fist podcast with top boxing writers Frank Latirzo and Jack Hirsch. Frank, a former amateur boxer out of Philadelphia, writes for NY Fights and can be seen on the Boxing Channel. Jack, an amateur boxer who competed in the New York Golden Gloves, was a 6-term president of the Boxing Writers Association. And now, here's Frank Latirzo and Jack Hirsch.
And we're back. Welcome to Glove Fist. My name is Frank Latirzo, former writer, full-time observer, joined by former 6-term president of the Boxing Writers Association of America, smiling, happy Jack Hirsch. Jack, I have no idea what we're going to talk about tonight, but we have a great guest coming on, Paulie Malignaggi. You set it up, and I told you when you presented it to me, I think Paulie is one of the best ex-fighter and analyst.
Well, you tell him that when he comes on.
I'll tell him that.
Paulie's got great insights. He's boxing's ultimate overachiever. And when I tell that to Paulie, I assume he's going to take that as a compliment because it is the highest compliment. But Frank, before we talk about the big fight, Terence Crawford and Canelo Alvarez, we got to let you get football out of your system. The NFL season is here, and you'll vent, but I do owe you an NFL apology. I question you on the Miami Dolphins. You compared them to heavyweight Joe Hipp. When I said, what heavyweight would they be? I thought they were more like Henry Clark, competent, so on, perhaps. But Frank, are they even as good as Joe Hipp?
Jack, you could make a case that there are 25 teams better than them, and there are 20 quarterbacks better than their quarterback. All I can say is this. The Dolphins are a very dysfunctional organization. They need basically a new owner, a new GM, a new coach, and a new quarterback. Other than that, they're okay. Unmute yourself.
As for the Jets, if I had to compare them to a heavyweight, we get names from the past, maybe Jack Bodell, something like that. But whatever.
Can we agree?
Bad day for teams. But the big fight is Saturday, Frank. But somehow, this great matchup, Canelo and Crawford, I don't think it's creating the buzz of some other super fights. Am I missing something?
Jack, I think we'll have a better read on that on starting tomorrow. I think it'll start when everybody starts arriving. But before we get to that, give me a Super Bowl pick. I'm going to go right now, Eagles over the Ravens.
No, well, I already have my pick, the Ravens over the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Okay. All right, now that's out of the way. Jack, I think starting tomorrow, this is going to get momentum because there are so many plots here, Jack. Nobody knows what's going to happen. We have Crawford moving up basically 3 weight classes. He's only fought 1 time in the last 13 months. His last fight was his first fight at 154. Look, I think he looked better and did better than you do. But the bottom line is he did not look all world in that fight. And he's fighting a guy now that I think is so motivated. And I think Canelo understands, Jack, that his legacy could be on the line here because when we look after this fight, the 4 best guys he fought, Mayweather, Bivol, Golovkin, and Crawford, if he loses to Crawford, you can make a case that he's 0-4 against those guys because the most meaningful fight he had against Golovkin, he lost, even though it was a draw.
We have a big difference of opinion, you and I, as far is who needs to win this fight more. And to me, it's Terence Crawford. And let me explain why. No matter what Canelo does, he's never going to be considered on the same level as a Sugar Ray Leonard, Marvin Hagler, Roberto Duran.
Agreed.
Crawford, no matter what he does going forward at this point, because he's been tarnished a little in past fights. Terence Crawford, if he wins this fight sensationally, especially sensationally, we're going to have to think about putting him truly in the all-time great company. Canelo, you can make a case for him based on body of work. Canelo's like the baseball pitcher who amassed over 300 victories in his career, but he's not your dominant, all-time great pitcher. And Canelo's not your all-time great dominant fighter. You put him in against Sugar Ray Leonard, virtually everyone's going to pick Sugar Ray Leonard to beat Canelo. Virtually
Wait
everyone.
1 second. At super middleweight?
Let's say the weights were even and Leonard could go up and Leonard's in his prime. Let's say all factors equal, weight's the same thing. Most people, you want to know the truth of the matter is, most people would pick Leonard as a junior middleweight to beat Canelo as a super middleweight. Okay?
I'm not sure about that, Jack.
You're putting too much emphasis, Frank. You're putting too much emphasis on weight. A little too much. And don't get me wrong, weight's important, but think of the past, Frank. Fighters always gave away pounds. With your logic, you would have thought, oh, Jake LaMotta might be too strong for Sugar Ray Robinson, and he was in one fight. But Robinson was better 5 out of the 6 fights. And that's the point I'm trying to make.
Jack, I'm just not sure if Sugar Ray Leonard of, say, the Hearns fight or the Duran fight, or what's that?
Fight.
Okay, of the Kaluli fight. If he was moving up to fight this Canelo, I mean, he's clearly the better fighter, but I'm not sure that he beats him. I would probably give him the edge, but I don't think it's etched in stone.
The Leonard of the Hagler fight would beat any version of Canelo.
Probably. Okay. But look, we both agree that Leonard...
Probably. Okay, there's some doubt there, which is fine. But my point is this. Canelo is never going to be put in that company, no matter what. Crawford can still be put in that company, because if he stops Canelo sensationally, people are going to say, we might have one of the greatest fighters in boxing history here.
That's off the chart. But Jack, let me ask you this. Obviously, if Crawford wins a split decision, it's big. But what if Canelo wins conclusively? I've debated a couple guys where they say it doesn't mean anything, and I disagree, Jack. I think it does. Canelo is a generational talent. I'm sorry, Crawford is a generational talent. Canelo has never defeated a generational talent on their game, at the top of their game, conclusively. If Canelo handles Crawford, I got to give him credit. Crawford has not been close to losing a fight. If Canelo beats him conclusively, he's got to get some credit for that.
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. He's got to get some credit for that. But I think, Frank, we're dealing in a fight with negatives here. Canelo hasn't been looking good in recent fights. I'll give him a pass on the Jermell Charlo fight because I actually thought he was good in that one particular fight. But, you just look at his fights against William Skull. He was dreadful. You could say he was a little out of shape. Edgar Berlanga, he was dreadful. There have been other fights where I talked about it. I talked to you a couple of years ago telling you Canelo is slipping. He's not the same fighter. But I also saw some slippage in Crawford in his last fight. He is 37. There gets to a point where a guy loses something off his fastball, and Crawford might be at that point. If Crawford ekes out a close decision, I don't know whether it puts him in another level, at a much higher level. I'm going to tell you why. Because there's an elephant in the room. And that elephant's Floyd Mayweather. And people might draw a comparison how Crawford and Mayweather both looked against Canelo. And they could come to the conclusion, well, Mayweather won more decisively than Crawford.
Jack, and people that know boxing will sit back and say, wait a second, Mayweather made Canelo come down to 152, and Canelo has improved by leaps and bounds since that fight. He had 2 left feet back then. He didn't know how to cut off the ring and pressure. His defense wasn't as good. So, would anybody pick that Mayweather who beat him in 2013 to beat Canelo this time? This version of Canelo? I don't think so.
Yeah, well, if the weights weren't too far apart, Mayweather would always beat Canelo. He'd always, let's say Canelo would always have a 10-pound weight advantage. Mayweather would, I think, beat him virtually every time.
But Jack, it's more than just the weight. Canelo has improved dramatically as a fighter. I mean, that would be like, you're going to argue with me because they have less amount of fights, but it would be like if Usyk took on Imada right now, Moses Artama right now. He's not developed yet. Even though he can beat world-class guys, he's nowhere near what he's going to be. Floyd was smart, Jack. That was great management. Let me get this future superstar now and handle him so I can have him on my record, because the better he does, the better my win looks.
I don't think Floyd was thinking that way at the time. I mean,
Jack, there's no doubt he was.
I'm not
no
sure
doubt.
when Floyd became obsessed with the unbeaten record. And
after he beat De La Hoya.
And being even at the De La Hoya fight, Mayweather needed it to be a breakout star. That was a super fight, and Oscar actually was the A side in that fight, and Floyd was 1A. So he kind of needed a mega event, and he got it with a past his prime De La Hoya. And that was a fairly close fight. You know what that showed me, Mayweather, De La Hoya? If they fought 3 times, it would be 2-1. Either way.
I agree with that.
A peak De La Hoya in its prime.
But I think you're crazy, Jack, to think it wasn't Mayweather's head to get that win over Canelo before he really got good and filled out as a fighter. Plus, he made him come down to 152. And everybody can say, well, you know what? It's only 2 pounds. There's been so much written lately about how hard it is for fighters and what it takes out of them to lose those last couple pounds. That was a big advantage for Mayweather.
Oh, definitely. But my point is Mayweather, the elephant in the room. Now, Canelo's been bringing up the topic, well, who's Crawford beaten? And obviously, Crawford had a monster win over Spence. He hasn't been given credit for it because now people are saying Spence was damaged goods. Never mind the fact that Spence fought a couple of times after his accidents. And, beat good fighters like Danny Garcia. Okay, I mean, tough guys.
And Sean Porter.
Right, and Sean Porter, exactly. And he's just not given the credit for that, Crawford. But when you look at Canelo, who has best wins against? He beat a number of really good fighters, but they were close fights. The Golovkin fights, the first 2 could have gone either way. Golovkin probably deserved the decision in the first fight. The second,
I don't think there's any probably, Jack. He clearly beat Canelo the first fight.
In the second fight, you can make an argument that Canelo won. Golovkin,
exactly.
A draw may have been the best verdict. He beat Danny Jacobs legitimately, but it was Canelo, but it was a close fight.
A little later in Danny's career.
Yeah, Erislandy, Lara, Austin Trout, nail biters. You can argue that Canelo legitimately won those fights, but they were very close.
So what's his signature win?
That's a really good question.
So Crawford has one and Canelo doesn't.
In a sense, yes. Well, I mean, but this fight is dealing with negatives to me, Frank, because Crawford's age 37. At what point does a guy slip? Now, Crawford, let's call him the better athlete, much better athlete between the two. And he seems to be training like a guy training for the decathlon, not your normal boxing training per se. And he
said that his legacy is on this fight. He knows that, Jack.
Right. He's had a big build-up for this fight, a really big build-up. Okay, Jack, we're waiting for, I guess, Paulie Malignaggia. We're letting our producer know, Brian, on, whenever Paulie is ready to just bring
Jack, let me ask you this.
Studio.
And I think I know your answer. So don't give me your answer. Give me the public perception. If Crawford beats the hell out of Canelo and stops him in 7 or 8 rounds, will anybody say he's better than Mayweather?
They're going to start saying that, some people.
Really? You really think so?
All of a sudden, it's going to become a debate. It's not a debate right now. You brought it up, Frank, but you're like a boxing aficionado. So you like to do a little comparison, gentle comparison you do now and then, but it's going to be a serious topic of debate amongst boxing fans, and I think they're going to be split.
If Crawford takes Canelo apart, then there's a debate between he and Floyd.
Yeah, I'm just dropping Paulie Malignaggi a little.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I still think there's going to be.
See, I think Crawford's a better fighter now, but if he doesn't win this fight, nobody will say it. Where if he wins this fight, and I'm going to tell you this, Jack, here's the narrative after the fight. If Crawford wins, he will not get full credit because they'll say he beat Canelo, who's maybe on the decline. And if Canelo wins, they'll say he beat a fat welterweight. So in a way, both guys are going to face the criticism that is always met after a fight, because it's never criticism that rises at tide. It's always one guy was good, the other guy sucked, and that's what they'll do here.
Now, let me ask you this, though. We don't know what went on in the sparring sessions with Boots Ennis, but you and I could agree, at least offensively, Boots Ennis is a great fighter. Not a very good fighter, a great fighter. And if he opened up in sparring against Canelo, if you asked me, my opinion, the times they would have went at it hard, I would think Boots maybe got the better of things. And I know it's a sparring session and you just kind of wonder mentally, could that have affected Canelo a little bit? He's probably thinking this Boots is a great fider. And if Crawford,
you mean if Boots did better, Jack? You mean if Boots got the better of it? I think the Boots bringing Boots in says A, how serious he was about the fight. B, and I've heard other guys say this, and I agree. If I had needed somebody for Crawford, I bring in Boots, and if I needed somebody for Boots, I bring in Crawford. The downside to that is if Boots did well and maybe had his way with Canelo, that might affect him mentally and maybe shake his confidence a little bit. The other side is if he handled him, he's thinking, this guy's younger. He's a little faster than Crawford. I wanted to say he was stronger, but you can't say that now.
Okay, just got a text from Paulie Malignaggi. He's going to be coming on any moment, and we'll put it right to him. Paulie was on the road, but he's... Okay, let me just give him a thumbs up that he's coming on. Okay, super. Okay.
Jack, I am psyched for this fight because I really don't know what's going to happen.
And 1 minute to Paulie. It's between rounds. Well, we're going to put him on the spot, and we're going to, I want to talk a little to Paulie about Mayweather's legacy, because he talked very well of Mayweather in the past, but that's when Mayweather's career was still going on. And also keep this in mind, Paulie for a while was training Conor McGregor and then had the falling out. So he was training him to actually fight Floyd, in that fight. And Paulie, who's a no-nonsense guy, never said Conor McGregor could beat Mayweather. He said maybe there'll be moments during the fight that he could have the better of it. That was a perfect way of putting it.
It was.
Small pockets, where he does really well. And, and it would have served, McGregor could have Paulie there the whole time. But
absolutely.
But the good thing about Canelo and Crawford, it's on Netflix. But you won all the competition with sports. There's college football going on. You have a whole host of games, and you're a big college football fan.
And Jack, as we're waiting for Paulie, I'm going to see what the card looks like that night and see if there's any big games on late.
Well, early in the day, there's an IBF welterweight title fight. Paddy Donovan, who we had on this show, he's fighting Lewis Crocker for the vacant IBF title. So that's
all right, Jack. Saturday night at 7:00, Missouri plays. They're ranked, but they don't play anybody. Is there any two ranked teams playing? It's 7:30. Jack, the big game. But the big game and it's a big game Saturday night at 7:30. I don't know if it'll affect the fight, but you have 8 Notre Dame playing Texas A&M, and that's becoming a rivalry. Notre Dame coming off a loss. I don't think that'll interfere with the fight.
Probably comes on right after. Netflix is going to show the undercard beginning something like 3:30.
Let's hope they have a picture, unlike they did with Tyson and Paul.
Yeah, speaking of that, Frank, I know that you're psyched. Who are you picking between Mayweather and Tyson, Frank? Let's put it.
I think the fight is a fugazi.
Paulie Malignaggi, former world champ, fellow Brooklyn guy, when used to be from Brooklyn. He used to be from Brooklyn. Okay, so we got that bond, Frank. Paulie, this is my co-host Frank Laterzo. Has a lot of good things to say about you. Actually, he was complimenting.
Paulie, how are you?
I told him to
Frank, Jack.
say it to you directly.
Frank and Jack, how are you, man? Sorry for my tardiness. I was driving. How you doing?
It's not Paulie. I'm going to say something, and I'm going to say it with no reservation.
Go for it.
I have a high opinion of myself when it comes down breaking fights, and I'll go toe to toe with anybody breaking fights. You're my favorite big time analyst. You're as good as anybody out there breaking fights down. And sometimes it gets on me because sometimes guys overlook you a little bit. It's like when I hear your broadcast, you say things that are on my mind at that second. I'm saying that's what I would have said if I was there. So I'm glad to have you on tonight. And when Jack presented me with the idea of who to come on and he mentioned your name, I said, let's get him.
Yeah, man. My pleasure, man. I appreciate the compliments, guys. I really, really do. Thank you.
Yep. Paulie, time permitting, we're going to talk, a little about your career. And you're still active as a bare knuckle fighter.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I retired from boxing, still active as a bare knuckle fighter. It's a little bit of a thing where, you want to continue going for something, striving for some high goals, but you want to also be honest with yourself, right? So boxing at world-class level is probably beyond my reach at this point, Of course, you look at a guy like Manny Pacquiao, he almost did win a title even at this age, which is crazy, and that's amazing. But I felt like the bare knuckle route is a little bit easier for older guys. I noticed that a lot of older guys do go into that realm, mostly from MMA, but some from boxing. But
Why, Paul?
It's 5 rounds. It's only 5 rounds, and that
really. You're not in the bare knuckle Hall of Fame, are you? It's in Belfast, New York.
As a broadcaster, I think I am. Yeah.
Belfast, New York, upstate New York. I was going to go there when I was at Canastota. They told me about it, and then they told me to wait to get up to Belfast. You're driving about an hour along winding roads in the middle
really
of
interesting,
nowhere.
Though, Jack. It's an interesting place because they have John L. Sullivan's place of training over there, and they have the house to kind of the way it was, and they kind of walk you through, how he used to live and how he used to stay. And he was a interesting character, I'll say the least. And it's an interesting place to visit. Nice little town as well. I had a good time when I went.
Paulie, I have two.
Go ahead.
I have 2 things that I want to get out of one regarding yourself, and the other one about something I hear said all the time about this Canelo Crawford fight, and I want your opinion on it. But let me ask you about the bare knuckle first. Now, when you were a pro fighter, you were not known as a puncher. Do you think fighting with the hand wraps on gives you an advantage now?
I think speed and accuracy gives me an advantage. The disadvantage is possibly breaking my hands, right? That's the problem I ran into in the first bare knuckle fight I did. I thought I was vastly superior to my opponent boxing wise, but getting left with one hand, it was harder to, be able to punch the way I wanted to anyway. And I wound up just jabbing and check hooking the rest of the fight. I thought I still won the fight. They didn't give it to me, but so I think power wise, if my hands hold up, because accuracy can be more devastating in bare knuckle. Not so much that it's concussive, but more so that it's uncomfortable for guys to get hit with even grazing shots and smaller shots. So I think with the accuracy, and if my hands hold up, I think I could be getting more stoppages. I really believe in that. But the guy I'm fighting is also very durable and has never been stopped in bare knuckle, and he's been a former champion in bare knuckle. So I don't go in. I go in with the same mindset I did in boxing. Prepare for a good, tough fight. do the preparation you need to do. And, if you're fully prepared, then, you'll be ready for whatever the opponent has. I don't try to think too much about what the opponent has. I try to think about what I bring to the table and my game plan. And of course, there's adjustments to be made in the fight because the opponent also comes prepared. So that's sort of my mentality in the fight. And
Okay,
that's going to be my mentality going into this one.
here's my question. Here's what I wanted to ask you about what you thought about this. I've been seeing a lot of guys online and who I've spoken with, and they all say Crawford can't hurt Canelo. Now, before you answer that, let me just tell you what I think. I think that's a myth because Crawford can hit Canelo cleaner than anybody he's fought since Floyd. And the myth that that Crawford doesn't punch hard enough, I think is a myth because you know better than I know, and I know from my experience, everybody that gets in there can punch. They said that Leonard couldn't hurt Hagler. Well, if he couldn't hurt him, why didn't Hagler just walk right through him? We know that Crawford punches hard enough to give Canelo a little trepidation, and he won't come at him like he's handcuffed. So I think the myth that Crawford has no power and Canelo has nothing to worry about is just that, a myth.
I think that here's the thing. I think when people talk about power and no power, they, as fight people, we understand that power and no power means concussive power, right? The people that, they like to use expressions, especially, and I've heard a lot of that in my career, pillow fisting and so on and so forth. I think people that are in the fight business understand that that's obviously never the thing. There's no such thing as a fist that's pillow fisted because fists have knuckles, fists still hurt. Now, I think power, no power to the fight, to the intelligent fight mind means concussiveness or non-concussiveness, right? To the layman or even the casual, they think no power means that literally it doesn't hurt. It's literally like it's getting hit with something soft. So I think we have to, when we make that differentiation, the casual becomes the idiot, right? Because any fist, and if anybody who's even been in a street fight, anybody who's been in anything knows that any kind of fist balled up hitting you in the face doesn't tickle, it still bothers you, even if it may not be concussive. So from that perspective, every punch is uncomfortable. Now, when they're not concussive, a fighter is trained to be able to deal with it, take it, and stay with the game plan. When they're concussive, they obviously offset anything you're doing because now you're wobbled and so on and so forth. So we got that out of the way. Do I think Crawford can concussively bother Canelo? No. But because we saw Golovkin not be able to do it, we saw a lot bigger punches not be able to do it. But I do think Crawford can make it uncomfortable by being sharp, accurate, and the sharpness and accurate shots, especially when you don't see them coming, when they're offsetting you and timing you. I think they can make you uncomfortable because you don't want to keep getting hit with them because they bother you. Even though they're not concussive, they still don't tickle. They bother you. Their fists, like I just explained. And I think that can offset you in a way. But I think, in my opinion, where Crawford can hurt Canelo is to the body. I think Crawford is an underrated body puncher. I think he's hurt some guys to the body well, and surprisingly, I think in some aspects, I think he's broken down guys to the body. He's gotten stoppages to the body. If you remember the Julius Ndongo fight, I think Canelo can be susceptible downstairs. A lot of body punchers are. And I'll say this: I think that Crawford also being able to switch to both sides, lefty and righty, also offsets some timing and create some timing issues for Canelo, and buy Crawford himself some time off the pressure. Because Canelo may want to pressure, but now all of a sudden you have to get a different look. You get a change of stance. There's a different look. You all of a sudden can't press a guy the same way because now you have to get used to that different look. And then he changes the look again. He changes the stance again. So I think there's different ways to offset Canelo. I do think Crawford can hurt Canelo. I would be surprised if it's a stoppage. I'll be honest with you. But unless it's Crawford stopping, unless it's Canelo stopping Crawford. But I also wouldn't be surprised here because I think Crawford is vastly superior to Canelo. And I will say this because I could be stepping on my own toes here. I never would have expected Crawford to hurt Spence the way he did. Because I thought and that shocked me. That Crawford had that.
He was a puncher in that fight.
Yeah. Firepower, dropped Spence even with a jab. Now, it is we can say, was it the same Spence that it's always been? We don't know. Because then in the Madrimov fight, his power he had trouble offsetting Madrimov and his pressure and the way he was stressing Crawford, and it became a tough fight. I will say this. I'm not really big on Canelo. I don't think he's been at world-class level for a while, which is why I think he's been fighting subpar opposition on purpose, and he's gotten away with it. Had he been forced to fight the mandatory contenders he was supposed to fight, guys like David Benavidez, guys like David Morrell, he wouldn't even be in this position to give us this fight to begin with. So it's a guy who's been hovering at mediocre level, pretending to be at world-class level for several years now. So this is why, to me, Crawford does have a chance. So when I tell you this, it's not going to sound as crazy. Madrimov at this point, even at 154, is a better fighter than Canelo is at 168 at this point. I'm not saying at Canelo's best, but I think Madrimov at this point, the way he was able to trouble Crawford and think with Crawford and be on the same wavelength IQ-wise and physically, I think can match Crawford physically and intellectually better than Canelo can at this point. Not that Canelo can't do it intellectually because Canelo has a lot of experience, but I think physically, I don't know if Canelo can bring that kind of versatility to the table anymore at this age. And I think that can bring something out of Crawford. Crawford, don't get me wrong, he's not spring chicken either. He's older, but he seems like that he still has more versatility. That's kind of how I'll break it down. And obviously there's questions to be asked and obviously there's debates to be had, and we'll find out this weekend. But I think that's my thinking going in, you know?
But
Jack,
Paulie,
I'll shut up.
Oh, go ahead, Frank.
Let me just try. So, Paulie, basically, you were very eloquent. You said, but you basically said, the way I took it, that Crawford has the power to give Canelo trepidation. And if he gives him trepidation and he forces him to think, that's advantage Crawford.
Yeah, because then once you got a guy, you force a guy to think a little bit, he'll have to slow down. Even if he intends to press you, he has to slow down to kind of reset and figure out things, because he doesn't want to keep walking into shots he doesn't see, you know? So I think that anytime you get a guy thinking, it slows down your pressure. And if you and a guy like Crawford wants to be able to slow down the pressure as much as he can from a guy like Canelo. And if he's able to slow it down enough, before you know it, the sand runs out of the hourglass, the time runs out, and Crawford wins on points.
If he slows him down, he's got a great shot.
Yeah. You got to be able to get his respect with the power a little bit to a degree, and you also got to be able to get respect with his your boxing ability and your ability to make him overthink so that he slows down the pressure just enough. He's not going to stop the pressure, obviously, because that's going to be his game plan, but slow it down just enough to where you can box adequately, and before you know it, the bell rings and you win on points.
And if he slows the pressure down, then Crawford picks it up a little bit and gives him more to think about.
Yes, exactly, and that kind of it's a building block process, right? But I still would be surprised if Crawford will win by stoppage. That would be surprising. Even an older Canelo, I think, is durable enough. But I do think Crawford, part of getting that respect is Crawford to be able to hurt Canelo to the body. And I think he may.
Go ahead, Jack.
But who would have ever thought that Canelo would hire Boots Ennis as a sparring partner, and Ennis would accept it? Now, I can't imagine Ennis going to camp and just following Canelo and basically acting the part of a sparring partner. I'm sure they had to have some hard sparring sessions. Boots Ennis is one of the best defensive fighters in the sport. What did that do to Canelo negatively?
I'll say this. I think with Ennis, he was brought into camp because he switches. He's a switch hitter. I think that was mainly to get that part. I think in dealing with that, bringing in Ennis was intelligent because, you know, you got a guy who switches pretty fluidly. I also know Canelo has Darrell Valsaint, who's over at Pro Box where I work, and has been a solid prospect over there, who also is a solid switch hitting guy. So Canelo brought in two really good switchers. I'll say that. I'll preface it with that. And I think that the sparring is going to be intense. I don't think that kind of sparring doesn't come with intensity. But I think in having seen Boots enough now through the years, we have seen that he's strong, he's intense, but I don't quite see him with the versatility Crawford has. I don't quite see it, you know. But I think it's a brilliant move for Canelo to bring in very good switch hitting guys. I think to match Crawford perfectly, obviously, is impossible, right? But I think you bring in two switch hitting guys who are super skilled. I think is really good preparation. And I will say Canelo bringing in Valsaint and Ennis into camp as a solid switchers that they are. I think that's a good move and it's an intelligent move. And I think it will prepare him about as good as it's going to prepare as he can be prepared.
I think Frank had a little technical difficulty.
Yeah, I heard some background noises.
Frank and myself, we talked about legacy for this fight. who's it more important to win this fight? To me, I say it's Crawford, and I'm going to tell you why. No matter what Canelo does in this fight and going forward, he's never going to be put on a level of, let's say, Sugar Ray Leonard, Marvin Hagler, Roberto Duran. But if Terence Crawford should win this fight sensationally, all of a sudden there's going to be a debate going on. Who's better, him or Floyd Mayweather?
Yeah.
He's going to be entering a new territory where they're going to compare Crawford to the all-time greats. So I don't want to hear from people that, well, if Crawford loses, they'll say he lost to a bigger man and they'll give him a pass. No, they're not going to look at it that way.
Well, with Crawford, I think what holds him back, and where I agree with you is that he missed out on a lot of the big welterweight fights when he was in the welterweight division because he was basically signed across the street to the other rival company. He wasn't able to get all the big names. Now, granted, Spence beat a lot of those big names, and then Crawford completely whitewashed Spence. But we know, Jack, we always know boxing math doesn't work. Just because Crawford completely whitewashed Spence doesn't mean he would have whitewashed all the other guys. You know, it might, but you know, we don't know for sure. He wasn't able to get in the ring with those guys because he was signed to the rival promoter. So because of that, there's always that little bit of a question mark, regardless of how great Crawford has been. I think he's been terrific, but of course, I'm talking about to the casual critic. You know, they're gonna say, oh well, you know, he didn't really build a resume on a lot of the top welterweights at his time, so now him losing this fight hurts him. I don't necessarily agree, but I could see why somebody would make that argument. I think with Canelo, what you said, he'll never be mentioned on the level of a Duran or Sugar Ray or Marvin Hagler. I'll tell you, nor should he really. This guy made a big part of his resume with controversial decisions and winning fights against naturally smaller guys like Josesito Lopez, shot guys like Alfredo Angulo and Chavez Jr., and not giving rematches when at the adequate time when he robbed guys like Erislandy Lara and Gennady Golovkin. So I don't think there's any way Canelo should be on the same level as the guys you just mentioned. I don't even think he should be on the same level as Mexican greats like Marquez, like Juan Manuel Marquez and Julio Cesar Chavez, to be honest. You know, some people want to put him there. But he's a solid fighter. And I think that where it's important for him is that if he gets beat by this much smaller guy, it looks much worse for him. So I think him winning is not so much going to put him on the pedestal with those guys. He'll never be on the pedestal with those guys. But I do think it could hurt him more because Crawford is a much smaller guy who had trouble already at 154 pounds when he went up to 154 and struggled a little bit in that fight. So I think if he loses to at 168 to a guy who, you know, was in Crawford, who turned pro at lightweight, and also at 168 where he avoided the best contenders while holding those titles hostage and not letting anybody else fight for them who was actually viable and had a chance to win them, I think does hurt him a lot. So I don't think it's important for Canelo because it aids his legacy. I think it's important for Canelo because it hurts him more. It hurts his legacy more, losing this fight. While with Crawford, I agree with you. It's a big fight because he enters that conversation. He does enter that conversation if he wins this fight. So I think it's very important, but from two different perspectives. Crawford can lose, and people will say, okay, he was lost as a smaller guy, but then he'll never enter that conversation. But he does have the opportunity to enter that conversation if he wins. Canelo, on the other hand, even if he wins, will never enter that conversation. But if he loses, his legacy, the look on his career, I think diminishes even more. So I think these two guys, for vastly different reasons, it's a very big moment in their career.
But Paulie, there's an elephant in the room, and that's Floyd Mayweather. If Crawford should win a close decision, people are going to compare the two performances against Canelo, and the people backing Mayweather would say, well, he beat Canelo decisively and Crawford just barely got by him. I'm thinking in terms of Crawford can somehow stop Canelo, look sensational, take him out. You know, there are two schools of thought when you talk about greatness. You're a big sports fan, I think, otherwise. Am I correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You talk about body of work and peak value, and that could be the argument between LeBron James and Michael Jordan. If you talk about body of work, LeBron's had a greater body of work. Let's forget 6 championships to 4. He's had a longer career, has done more over his career. But at peak value, now the discussion changes a bit. Who was better at peak value? You could argue, you know, the argument could shift back to Jordan. And that's what I think you have here with Crawford and Canelo. Canelo's always going to be a body of work fighter, like what he did over his career. He's never going to enter like the peak, value category, to match him up against the Durans and Leonards. But Crawford could actually get their age. I mean, you know about that. The years go by. Eventually, the skills start slipping a bit. I remember what you said when you lost to Danny Garcia. At that point, I thought you half checked out. The motivation didn't seem to be there. Knowing you, following your career, you didn't seem to care nearly as much at that point. Obviously, Crawford cares a tremendous amount about this. But the bottom line is, he's 37. At some point, the slippage sets in. Now, he could train like he's training for the decathlon, put in all this extra time, train like he's a world-class athlete. But at a certain point, it affects you. And also, Paulie, let me ask, this is boxing. No matter how hard he trains otherwise, and Crawford's going to be in phenomenal shape, does it translate to what you do in the ring?
Yeah, and that's those are all great points, Jack. When you talk about body of work at the highest level, I always think of a quote I saw one time said on NFL Films, an NFL Films video I saw, where it said, "Great athletes aren't always great, but they're great when they need to be." And it was talking about the likes of Terry Bradshaw and Joe Montana being undefeated in Super Bowls. Mayweather at the highest level was, phenomenal. Ray Leonard at the highest level was, again, phenomenal. Canelo, not so much. A lot of his wins are built up against even the body of work. A lot of his wins are built up against, guys who, he was pretty much favored to beat pretty handily even before the fight. I think at 168 he has some solid wins, but I never thought that, unlike the other guys, I never thought that Canelo was ever the best guy in his weight class. At 160 when he was champion, at 160, he won the 154-pound title against Matthew Hatton. It was vacant. Then he went to 160. I thought Jamal Charlo in his prime at 160 was a very big threat to Canelo, and Canelo chose not to fight him. But then he gave us
Charlo threw his own career away.
No, but that's Charlo now. I'm talking about Charlo at 160 when he was dominating. I'm talking about that Charlo. We gotta put moments in time when they matter. You can't put Ali in 1981 against Tyson in 1986 because it's not the same matchup. It's still so. Charlo and Canelo had a moment in time where they were both at a hot moment, and Charlo was very dominant at that moment. And they created this champion and recess thing just so they wouldn't have to make that fight because Charlo was the mandatory. But then Canelo ends up giving us the Avni Yildirim fight, and he says, "Oh yeah, I had to fight him because he was the mandatory." No, you didn't, because if that was the case, if it was about really honoring mandatories, you would have fought Charlo, right? So I thought that was always an iffy thing where that Charlo at that moment right there was a very big threat to Canelo, and Canelo chose not to fight him. Then at 168. I thought he did very well. He unified against some very good fighters, but there was always that boogeyman, Demetrius Andrade, in the weight class, who in his prime was dominant and was avoided by everybody. And Canelo gave us the "no, but you don't sell." Remember the post-fight press conference? Yeah. You don't sell, nobody knows you. But then again, Canelo also decided to fight Rocky Fielding at the same weight class. So really, is it really about not selling, or are you just ducking the best fighters? So I can go tit for tat here. When in terms of building the body of work guy, if you look at the body of work from a microscope, it's still it's a world-class fighter, but how much body of work are we really looking at? If Alfredo Angulo was shot, Josecito Lopez was 140-pounder. Julio Cesar Chavez sucked to begin with, and was there just because he was his father's son. You gave us pay-per-views against these kind of guys. The Danny Jacobs fight, solid win. So we do know it does establish Canelo at a world-class level. Wins like over guys like Danny Jacobs, over guys like Caleb Plant, over guys like Callum Smith. At the time he beat them, they do establish a world-class level. But that's where I look at the body of work and agree with you, Jack. But yeah, big moments. I don't think he beat Golovkin ever in any of the fights, and he didn't rematch. Lara, he should have had an immediate rematch like Mayweather used to have immediate rematches when they were close fights. He never did. And we're here. So that I think that's also why this fight is happening. Had these other fights happened, I don't think this fight would be here because Canelo would have already kind of been swept away, right? So Canelo's they've kept him hovering around because he's a money machine, and that's fine. Okay, I get it. It's a business. But this money machine, you have him hovering around, you keep him floating here instead of have him step on the engine, because if you step on the gas, you're going to overrun him. You're going to overrun the RPMs at this point, right? So you keep him floating against nondescript opposition like Belanga and the likes. of that. And now we're here with Crawford fight. So, when you look at it from that perspective, I think Crawford's been at a higher level and may still be at a higher level. So
Paulie, who are you picking?
I think if Crawford can get a decision, I have my doubts about whether Crawford gets a decision. I don't think Crawford can stop Canelo. I think he can get his respect enough to beat him. I think it could controversially be go Canelo's way, but I think Crawford may get a fight where he could win a decision. I think Crawford will win. I think the fight goes a distance.
You know about that disputed decisions in your own career.
Mm-hmm.
Would you advise Crawford's people to start complaining now that they're concerned, go public with it?
You could
embarrass the officials. Didn't you do before you fought Juan Diaz?
Yeah.
You lost the disputed decision in the first fight.
Yeah.
I don't recall. Did you complain before the first fight with Juan Diaz?
Yeah. And of course, people were talking.
You thought you might get a raw deal, and you were talking about it, and then and then the scoring was questionable.
Yeah. I tried to put the pressure on the commission because I knew they had a shady reputation for out of town fighters in Texas at the time. So I tried to put a little pressure on them by outing them before the fight because I felt like I was going to be sharp in the fight and I didn't want to be robbed in the fight in front of this commission. So I felt like if I put them out there and I put a little pressure on them, that they wouldn't have the goal to rob me. And they still did because this is boxing and there's nobody polices it and they'll still do what they want to do, But I do think that it wouldn't hurt for Crawford to, kind of put it out there like, these guys better give me a decision and so on and so forth. I know how they do, so on and so forth. Here's the problem. Typically when you do this, and this is one of the reasons why I think the media are clueless about this sport. I've never really had any respect for the media in boxing. I think they're moronic. And then Jack, on an individual basis, I have a lot of guys I like in the media. But from a knowledge perspective, I really don't really care for the knowledge in the media. I think most media, even a lot of guys I'm friends with, to be honest, don't know shit about boxing, even if they write about boxing but I'll say this. And one of the examples is this right here. When I was going about this game plan before the Diaz fight, instead of the media jumping on what I was saying and basically getting my back and saying, he is right. Texas has had a shady reputation. Instead, they were writing articles saying I was already preparing my excuses when I lose. So, this is always like what you're dealing with the media. Instead of, they'd rather kiss ass and get their credentials rather than jumping on this. Because really, Crawford could do this, but the media would never back him because you know what happens when you cross Canelo. You can't get a credential to any of the fights, So everybody would rather get their credential to the fights and not write the truth, right? So being that that's spineless, it may not matter, but I think it would set up clicks. I think it would develop hype, because either way, you go out there, you do what you do. But and you put pressure on the commission to not rob you because you told them they robbed you, but they may still rob you. But if they still rob you when you said that, now it goes even more viral, like it did with me, and that's why I was able to get that rematch. Maybe if that happens, you force a rematch because now it goes so viral that the people will demand it for sure. I'm not sure. I think Crawford can beat Canelo, but I'm not sure he gets a decision. But we'll see.
Okay, well, you were talking about Mayweather before. I wish Frank Laterzo didn't have the technical difficulty and was still here. We've been arguing about Mayweather a long time. He thinks Mayweather was the ultimate cherry picker. He gives Mayweather a lot of credit for beating Diego Corrales, but he agrees Mayweather had arguably the greatest career in boxing history when you consider the money he made. He was able to retire unbeaten, but he feels that Mayweather's career was manufactured to a large degree. And I know you've always been a big Mayweather booster. How great was Mayweather? You put him on the level.
Here's my argument on behalf. Here's my argument on behalf of Mayweather. I think with time, because people were always making the Pacquiao comparison, right? Pacquiao did something, they did things that really nobody ever was doing, right? And the way he was doing them, I think in time, more and more people have agreed with me that they thought he was on PEDs. I've noticed that like a lot of people have come to my side. I even heard Crawford talking about this in a recent interview as well. So I think in time, with time being allowing people to step out and see it for what it was, I think more and more people agree with me that Pacquiao was likely on PEDs, but we'll never know, right? So it has to be an opinion. But if you look at anybody but Pacquiao, when they moved up in weight and had success, they had to kind of start picking their spots because the weight classes matter so much. Guys are so much bigger that now you can't just go after the best guy in every single weight class. So why do I give this example? Because if you eliminate the Pacquiao thing, where he was just going up in weight class and taking on the biggest punchers, the biggest threats constantly for 8 weight classes, which of course, again, is unrealistic. And and especially at the pace he was fighting at every single weight class, the lack of defense that he had in every single weight class, you start to see where I'm coming from. I think more and more people have seen where I'm coming from, because you have to be more careful in those aspects. You can't just keep getting hit the way you were getting hit at higher weight classes without going to sleep or without getting beat by these bigger guys. It's not like Pacquiao fought a defensive, masterful performance against Cotto or Margarito or anybody else. You know, he just took all the shots and ate them like they were candy, right? Against bigger, stronger punches. That's not likely clean, you know, from my opinion standpoint. Here's where people lose the Mayweather appreciation, because they compare it to that. But if you look at everybody else that moved up several weight classes, you look at Mayweather at 130, 135. He was the best guy. There was nobody near him. He was the best guy at 130 and 35. He beat Corrales. He beat Castillo, a very difficult Castillo at that time, by the way. A very difficult Castillo.
But that was a disputed decision. Harold Letterman, HBO's unofficial judge.
Yes. But when you see the way Mayweather when you see the way Mayweather handled the rematch, you do realize Mayweather did have an injury in the first fight. You want to say that's an excuse, but Mayweather also gave him an immediate rematch 5-6 months later, and went on to, in a troubled first half of the fight, pulled some distance between him and Castillo in the second half of the fight and dominated the second fight, and immediately gave the rematch, something that Canelo never does. Okay. And ended up beating clearly a very, very difficult guy, a guy who at that time was very difficult to deal with, and a guy who afterwards was still difficult to deal with and had some very key wins even afterwards against guys like Casamayor and Corrales and Corrales in the rematch and so on and so forth. Once you start going to 40 and 47, do you want to call Mayweather a cherry picker? I thought he beat a lot of good fighters at 147. He didn't hang around at 140 too long. You could say he could have made the Zoo fight, but Zoo ended up losing the hat to
Antonio Margarito.
Here's the thing.
Antonio Margarito was considered a beast at one point. Now we know Mayweather was a spanked Margarito.
No, but here's the thing. Here's the thing.
At that time,
here's the thing.
He was the equivalent of David Benitez.
But was he, or was it the hand wraps? Because once Margarito's hand wraps got uncovered, he never gave it that kind of performance.
But at the time, we didn't know that.
At the time, we didn't know that.
He avoided Paul Williams.
But here's the thing. Here's where I'll go with this. Remember Pernell Whitaker winning the 154-pound title. He had won several championships in several weight classes. If you notice, Pernell Whitaker, when he went to 154, it was beyond a weight class it was beyond the weight classes he could really physically be at. So he was just looking to achieve something for the resume. But at that point, it's beyond your physical ability to be able to compete and campaign at weight classes like that. Mayweather was kind of the same situation. If you look at Pernell Whitaker, when he won the 154-pound world title, he didn't go after Terry Norris. He went after Julio Cesar Vasquez. You understand me? Is it a cherry pick? Not really, because at that moment, you're going to a weight class where you shouldn't even be at to begin with, and you're looking to accomplish something. And Whitaker did that and came back down because it wasn't a weight class that he was really going to campaign at. Mayweather, by the time he's at 41, 47, it's not a weight class he really can physically match up with against everybody. So you got to now start. You can't now start saying, oh, he should be fighting the best guys in every weight class. The only guy to ever do that was Pacquiao, and likely Pacquiao was on steroids. So and more and more people agree with that now. So if you eliminate the Pacquiao comparison, there's really nobody else that did it that way. Everybody else picked and chose as they went up in weight class. Everybody did. Even Roy Jones never went to Europe to fight Milishevsky, right?
But I agree. But the weight divisions are manufactured in large part. Now, take the fighters around New York who you revered. You probably really looked up to Emil Griffith, would be my guess. You know?
Yeah. All those New York guys. You know, those are all guys to look up
from welterweight to middleweight and wins the middleweight title. Now, when Golovkin was in his prime and Mayweather was in his prime, there was a little talk of Mayweather boxing Golovkin, but there wasn't pressure on Mayweather because he was a smaller guy. Fight never took place, never negotiated, but Mayweather said it would be easy work for him if he fought Golovkin. That's my beef with him. If you're going to say it's going to be easy work, take the darn fight, because had Mayweather defeated that version of Golovkin, it would have been a legendary victory.
I don't think that Mayweather would have matched up well with Golovkin because Golovkin is too big, too strong. Okay, so I think Mayweather saying easy work, it's probably just him trying to sell himself. Again, you got to understand weight classes exist for a reason. I will tell you where my one criticism of Mayweather is, because he went through the PBC gamut, right? He beat the top welterweights at PBC for the most part. He didn't fight Thurman. Spence was still coming up, so I don't even really criticize him for that. But there was one guy who stylistically matched up, and I thought would have always been a nightmare for Mayweather, because he was a nightmare for anybody who boxed him, and that was Amir Khan. Amir Khan was a nightmare for boxers. Amir Khan had difficulty with pressure physical guys, but if you tried to box Amir, if you look at the resume going back,
you know firsthand.
Not just that. Anybody who tried to box Amir beat some very good boxers, because he was very difficult to box. He was very difficult to time. I myself had a lot of trouble with him. Devin Alexander got a lot of trouble with him. Luis Collazo had a lot of trouble with him. Zab Judah had a lot of trouble with him. We were all pure boxers, right? So stylistically, it's a very difficult thing to deal with. It's not so much, oh, well, Amir lost to this guy, so Mayweather would do this to him. No. You're not timing Amir. Nobody ever showed they could time Amir. Danny timed Amir because Danny Garcia used to punch with you. He wasn't like a slip and rip kind of guy. He was like I'm gonna time it by punching with you, and he caught Amir. That's a different kind of timing. That's not slick boxer timing. Mayweather is slick boxer timing. Mayweather's not, I'm gonna punch with you timing. So nobody ever timed Amir in his prime. Boxers were not the guy.
Amir couldn't take a good punch. Amir
couldn't take a punch, but you had to catch him with that kind of power shot as well. It wasn't like, you were knocking him down with jabs. Let's face it. The shots that knocked out Amir were also heavy power shots, and they were also pressure shots.
There was a debate going on in social media with Mayweather and Roy Jones between the two.
Yeah, I saw that. I actually agree with Roy. I actually agree with, and I think, and I give Mayweather flowers, and I defend Mayweather a lot. But I do think stylistically, Amir would have given trouble to Floyd, and I think there's a reason why that fight never happened. I don't knock Floyd for not fighting certain guys, because again, 147 wasn't really his weight class. Just like with Pernell Whitaker, we don't criticize him for not fighting Terry Norris when he won the 154-pound title. I think you have to keep the same standard.
Yeah, that wasn't a demand at the time.
Doesn't matter. You have to still hold the same standard if you're going to criticize, right? We don't hold that standard. But I like Pernell anyway. Regardless, Amir started at 135, so there was no reason to say, oh, he's too big or he's physically. There's none. Amir and Floyd could have happened. They were in the same stable. They both were ex-lightweights. So if there's something to touch on there, it would probably be Floyd not fighting Amir. I'm not going to go after Floyd for not fighting Paul Williams, Margarito, or even Golovkin, which I think still starts flying off the handle when we start mentioning Golovkin, because weight classes exist for a reason.
Paulie, you said something interesting. You were training Conor McGregor for a while until you had a fall.
Well, I was sparring with him. I wasn't training him, but I was sparring with him. Yeah.
Oh, you were sparring with him. But you were advising him, maybe.
Yeah, we were in camp. I mean, we didn't really last that long to say that we were advising him.
You said something that I thought was really brilliant. You never said that he could actually beat Mayweather, but you said maybe there are pockets in the fight where he could get the better of it, certain pockets of the fight to come up with a credible showing. I mean, was anything more he could have done had you been with him in camp?
I'll tell you what, Jack. I got to be honest with you, at that time, because that was in between sparring session number 1 and sparring session number 2, where I had actually left that camp to go work a show, and the media hounded me, asking me for how sparring was with McGregor, because he had put up a picture. I got to be honest with you, the guy sucked, and he had no shot at beating Mayweather, but I couldn't come back out of camp knowing I was going to go back to that camp and say, this guy sucks. This guy's got no shot. You guys are wasting your time and money on this fight. It's actually a complete waste of time. I can't even believe when I sparred this guy that he's actually fighting Mayweather. What was going through my mind after the first sparring session was, I can't believe how much this guy sucks, and this is going to be a $300 million fight. I am blown away that's a promotion can go to this level for such a one-sided.
We only have a minute left. The Mayweather-Tyson exhibition. I mean, how is that going to turn out? I mean,
I don't think it's going to sell well. I think the cat's out of the bag. Mike's old, I think Jake used that image already,
Is it going to be? Is any of it going to be real or what? Is it going to?
No, that's the thing. That's something. That's a good question, Jack. Because an exhibition is not a real fight, so you can actually stage it, right? You're allowed to. They don't take bets on exhibitions. They allow bets on real fights, and that's why Jake and Mike had to become a real fight, because people weren't, were complaining that it could be staged. Well, exhibitions can be staged, or exhibitions can at least be mildly staged in the very least. Or you can say, hey, we'll just work and we won't go that hard. And it's all legal. It's all legal once it's an exhibition. If it's not a real fight, it's all legal. So it can be just sports entertainment like wrestling, where you can stage it and nobody can complain about it. So I don't know if there's people dumb enough to fall for this, but it's an interesting concept for sure.
Okay, Paulie, I guess we've run out of time. The final bell rang for But Frank Laterzo, myself, we appreciate you coming on. And we could say this with a clear mind. You're our first guest who we have to admit knows more about boxing than we do. Okay?
It's all opinion. It's all opinion, Jack. It's all. I just enjoy the discussion.
Paulie, former world champion, Paul, and great boxing analyst and great fighter during his time, Paulie Malignaggi.
Thanks, guys.
Good night, everyone.